April 6, 1945. Tokuyama Naval Base, Inland Sea, Japan. Dawn never truly broke that morning. It seeped in slowly, a gray, heavy light filtering through mist that clung to the shoreline like burial cloth. The mountains surrounding the harbor were silhouettes, soft-edged and somber. And below them, resting in the stillness of the water, was a shape so vast it seemed carved from the horizon itself. The battleship Yamato, the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy. The heaviest battleship ever built, a floating fortress of steel and firepower, and today, a condemned relic. Captain Kosaku Ariga, age 49, stepped onto the forward deck as the morning wind curled around him, carrying the smell of diesel, salt, and burning coal from nearby repair vessels. His gloved hands rested on the cold railing as he surveyed his ship, his command, one last time. Yamato stretched nearly 900 feet from bow to stern, her armor plating glistening with condensation. Massive 18.1-inch gun barrels, the largest naval guns ever mounted on a warship, pointed skyward as if challenging a heaven that no longer listened. Behind him, footsteps approached in sharp, disciplined rhythm. "Captain," reported Executive Officer Chuichi Kikawa, saluting crisply. Ariga nodded but didn't turn. Readiness? All compartments sealed. Fuel remaining. Just enough to reach Okinawa. Kikawa hesitated. "Sir, the men know." Rumors are everywhere. Ariga exhaled, watching his breath drift away like smoke. Rumors? No, the truth. Operation 10 Go was not a mission. It was an offering. A final gesture from a nation surrounded, starving and desperate. Ariga finally turned, locking eyes with his XO. "Then let the men know this. The Empire still expects us to fight." Kikawa held his gaze a moment longer, then nodded and strode away, barking orders down the deck. From below, Yamato's crew began emerging for morning assembly. Boys, many of them. 17, 18 years old, some barely sprouting whiskers. They stood in lines along the deck, sea bags at their feet, rifles slung over shoulders. Their breath fogged in the cold air, rising in uniform plumes as Ariga approached the front rank. He stopped. The young faces looked back at him, nervous, determined, loyal to a fault. Most knew they were marching toward death. Some refused to believe it. A few welcomed it. Ariga raised his voice, letting it carry across the ship. "Men of Yamato," he began. "For years we have defended our homeland with honor. Today we sail again. You will hear rumors. You will hear doubts. Ignore them." He paused as the wind swept across the deck. "There is no room for despair on this ship." A murmur rippled through the lines. Not fear, not yet, but something deeper. Acceptance. Ariga continued, his voice steady. "Tomorrow the American invasion of Okinawa will intensify. Our army defenders are outnumbered. Our air forces are depleted. And so the Emperor commands Yamato to assist." He did not say the rest. That they had fuel for a one-way trip only. That the plan called for Yamato to beach herself on Okinawa's coast and fight as a stationary fortress until destroyed. That the mission had been designed not to save Okinawa, but to buy time. A single day, a single breath. A final gesture of defiance. Across the harbor, sailors aboard escort vessels watched Yamato in awe and grief. Light cruisers, Yahagi, destroyers, Isokaze, Hamikaze, Yukikaze, and others, all part of the doomed task force, loaded ammunition and took on what little fuel remained in the Empire's reserves. The inland sea was silent, but for the clatter of cranes and the distant rumble of engines warming up. Ariga looked toward the east, toward the unseen horizon, where Okinawa lay braced for invasion. "Prepare to depart," he ordered. By mid-morning, Yamato's engineering compartments glowed with the orange light of active boiler furnaces. Steam lines hissed and rattled. Crews secured watertight doors, checked magazine temperatures, and reported ammunition ready. Below decks, Petty Officer Masami Taira, Okinawan by birth, slid a family photo into the breast pocket of his uniform. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the knowledge that his home, his family, his entire island was now at the center of hell. A fellow sailor nudged him gently. "Masami, we'll come back." Masami forced a smile. "I hope you're right." But he didn't believe him. No one did. 11:25 hours. The Imperial ensign lifted slowly above Yamato's stern, catching the wind like a blood-red sunrise. A bugle sounded. Officers snapped to attention. Sailors lined the rails. A voice boomed from the loudspeakers. "Yamato, departing." Harbor tugs pulled at her bow, guiding the massive warship through narrow straits. Civilians, fishermen, dock workers, families lined the shoreline, bowing deeply as she passed. Some saluted, some prayed, some wept. For many, Yamato was the last symbol of an empire collapsing under the weight of war. Masami Taira scanned the shoreline as they cleared the harbor, and his breath hitched. A group of schoolchildren stood waving small flags. One child held a hand-painted sign. "Yamato, protect us." Masami swallowed hard. He wasn't sure they could. Once clear of the inland sea, Yamato's engines roared to full power. Her bow cut through the water with the force of a charging beast, throwing white spray to either side. Her escorts formed into a defensive ring, their wakes weaving white lines across the blue-gray ocean. To the south lay Okinawa. To the east lay the vast Pacific. Above them, unseen, unheard, American submarines tracked their movements. Aircraft carriers farther south prepared the next wave of sorties. Reconnaissance pilots scanned the sea for one unmistakable silhouette. The one ship every American naval officer had studied, feared, and prepared to destroy. Yamato, the last super-battleship. The fist Japan intended to swing one final time, and somewhere deep inside her armored citadel, Captain Ariga whispered a single truth. "This ship will not return." April 7th, 1945. Dawn, East China Sea. The ocean was unnaturally calm. A flat, endless sheet of gray-blue glass stretching toward the southern horizon, where Okinawa lay burning beneath American bombardment. Yamato cut through the stillness like a leviathan rising from myth. Water curling away from her bow in great white arcs. The ship's massive bulk felt alive. Steam pulsing through pipes, engines pounding deep in her belly. Deck plates vibrating under the rhythm of a warship, pushing every remaining ounce of power through her turbines. Captain Ariga stood on the starboard bridge wing, binoculars lifted to his eyes. When he lowered them, the early light revealed a face carved by exhaustion, but held rigid by duty. "Speed?" he asked without turning. 22 knots, sir," answered XO Kikawa. "Maintain." A stiff wind swept across the deck, fluttering the rising sun flag overhead. Far above, the sky was a dome of empty blue. Too empty. Every officer felt it. Every sailor sensed it. "Sir," Kikawa ventured quietly, "if the Americans spot us..." Ariga cut him off softly. "They already have." It wasn't pessimism. It was certainty. American submarines had tracked them. Long-range reconnaissance aircraft had reported their position. And every man aboard Yamato knew what that meant. The enemy was gathering. Below decks, 06:15 hours. The forward magazines throbbed with heat as gunners loaded shells for the 18.1-inch main batteries. Each shell taller than a man, each weighing more than 3,000 pounds. The hoist machinery groaned. Crewmen wiped sweat that immediately froze in the frigid air. Masami Taira tightened the straps of his anti-flash hood, his breath fogging the dimly lit compartment. "You think they'll let us get close?" asked Seaman Aoki, barely 18. Masami shook his head. "They won't. They'll hit us long before Okinawa." "You sound certain." Masami exhaled. "Because if I were the Americans, I'd hit us now." The deck shuddered slightly, just the vibration of Yamato's advancing engines, but it felt like a warning. Oki swallowed. "Then, why are we going?" Masami looked at the enormous shells arrayed like iron giants waiting for release. "Because this ship was built to die," he murmured. Oki stared, unsure if he'd heard correctly. On the bridge, 07:02 hours. Lookouts scanned the sky constantly, calling bearings in sharp, nervous voices. Nothing. Clear. No aircraft, no contrails, no shadows. But Ariga didn't relax. Neither did Kikawa. The Americans would not attack in ones or twos. They would come with dozens, then hundreds. Carriers to the south had already launched multiple strikes at Okinawa at this hour. It was only a matter of time before one of them turned north, toward the largest battleship ever built. A burst of static cracked over the radio. "Message from Yahagi, sir," a communications officer announced. "Their radar is reading faint air contacts to the southeast. Extreme distance." "Course?" Ariga asked. "Intercepting." Ariga's jaw tightened. "Sound general quarters. 7-10 hours. Battle stations." Klaxons wailed. Crewmen sprinted through narrow passageways. Guns roared to readiness. The entire ship vibrated with purpose. In the secondary battery turrets, crews slammed 6-inch shells into breaches, greased the bearings, and checked the elevation gears. On the anti-aircraft decks, sailors manned 25mm Type 96 guns, their hands already shaking with adrenaline. Masami Taira strapped himself into his gun position near turret number 2. The cold wind whipped across the open deck, biting his exposed skin. A petty officer shouted over the shrieking gusts. "Scan the skies. They'll come low or high. No in between." Masami scanned the horizon. Nothing. Just endless indifferent ocean. 7:45 hours. Yamato's escorts, destroyers Isokaze, Hamikaze, Yukikaze, and others, tightened their formation, wakes converging behind them in long white trails. The smaller ships cut through the water like wolves, guarding a giant. On Yukikaze, Lieutenant Yoshida watched Yamato's massive silhouette ahead and muttered, "Even mountains look small before their avalanche." His captain overheard and replied flatly, "This avalanche will break before it hits land." The bridge fell silent. 8-10 hours. First contact. A black speck appeared on the horizon. Then another. Then 4. "Aircraft sighted. Bearing 132. Alarms erupted across Yamato. Ariga stiffened. "Identify." The answer came instantly. "American scout planes. Hell divers. Circling us." The first wave was not an attack. It was the beginning of the hunt. From thousands of feet above, American pilots stared down at the glittering monster below. Their radios crackling. "This is Scout-led. We've located her." "Confirmed. This is Yamato. Repeat, we have Yamato in sight." Those words sealed the fate of more than 3,000 Japanese sailors. Ariga closed his eyes for half a heartbeat. "It begins," he whispered. 9-12 hours. American carriers react. Aboard USS Hornet, flight decks thundered with rapid launches. "Avengers, launch! Helldivers, launch! Fighters, move, move!" Pilots sprinted to their aircraft, adrenaline pounding like a second heartbeat. One aviator slapped the fuselage of his Helldiver and grinned. "We get to kill the big one today." Within minutes, the sky over the Philippine Sea filled with American aircraft. More than 300 heading north. Back aboard Yamato, 09:28 hours. Lookouts cried, "Dozens of aircraft. Altitude unknown. Coming fast." Ariga stepped forward. "Steady all guns." His voice was calm, steady, almost gentle. To him, this was no longer a mission. It was a duty, an ending. A moment written the day Yamato's keel touched steel. The deck trembled as the first AA guns opened fire, sending streams of tracer fire arcing into the sky. Masami Taira clenched the grips of his gun, heart hammering, ears ringing as explosions echoed across the waves. He whispered a prayer he hadn't spoken since childhood. The first wave of American aircraft descended like a storm of steel and fire. Yamato raised her guns, and the greatest battleship battle in history began. April 7th, 1945, 10:05 hours. East China Sea. The sky split open. From above, the clouds came the roar, not of engines, but of hundreds of engines, merging into a single, monstrous scream that shook the air itself. Yamato's lookouts pointed frantically upward as shadows swarmed across the high sun, darkening the horizon like a flock of steel-winged predators. Enemy aircraft, bearing 110 through 190, dozens, no, scores. Captain Ariga stepped onto the bridge wing, wind tearing at his greatcoat as he stared into the white glare. They were coming. Avengers, Helldivers, Hellcats, formations stacked in the sky like layered storm fronts. A petty officer shouted from the starboard rangefinder, 300 aircraft detected, multiple attack groups inbound. 300. Ariga closed his eyes for a brief, solemn moment. Yamato had been designed to fight battleships, not to withstand the fury of an entire carrier fleet. "Prepare to engage," he said softly. The order echoed across steel corridors, down ladders, through blast doors, into every compartment where men trembled at their stations. Klaxons shrieked, guns elevated, ammunition hoists groaned. Masami Taira gripped the handles of his 25mm AA gun, breath frosting in short bursts as fear tightened around his chest. Then the American attack began. 10-11 hours. The sky falls on Yamato. The first wave dove out of the sun. Hell divers, dozens of them, their wings glittering with bomb racks. Tracer rounds erupted from Yamato's gun decks, the air turning into a tornado of glowing orange lines. The battleship vibrated as the 5-inch guns hammered upward, each shot sending a shudder through the deck plates. Masami fired blindly into the swarm. The recoil rattled his teeth. Shell casings clanged across the steel grating. Smoke stung his eyes. A hell diver streaked toward the ship's bow, bomb doors open. "Brace!" someone screamed. A thunderous impact rocked the forward deck as a 500-pound bomb punched through armor plating, detonating deep inside the hull. A fireball erupted from the bow vents, spraying black smoke across the deck. A shockwave slammed Masami sideways. His headset went dead. His ears rang violently. But there was no time to recover. A second wave followed instantly. Avengers armed with torpedoes skimming just above the waterline. "Port side! Torpedo planes incoming!" Ariga shouted orders from the bridge, voice drowned beneath the deafening roar of guns. "Hard starboard! Prepare to evade!" The giant ship leaned into a tight turn, tighter than her size should have allowed, throwing sailors off balance as she strained against the sea. But the Avengers adjusted. They always adjusted. The first torpedo sliced through the water like a streak of white lightning, detonating against Yamato's port armor in a geyser of fire and steel. The ship lurched violently. Lights flickered. Pipes burst. Men in the engine rooms were thrown into machinery. On the bridge, Okinawa caught himself against a chart table, breath knocked from his lungs. "Damage report," Ariga barked. "Port engine room flooding, bulkheads holding, but, sir, that was a heavy hit." Another torpedo struck, then another. A third failed to detonate. A miracle that saved hundreds of men. Masami clung to the gun mount as the deck beneath him rolled sharply. "Keep firing!" his petty officer roared. Masami fired until his vision blurred, until smoke stung his lungs, until his arms ached from the recoil. 10 to 23 hours. The killing spiral tightens. The air above Yamato had turned into a hellstorm. Smoke, tracers, bomb bursts, flaming debris from falling aircraft. Yet the Americans kept coming. A squadron of hell divers peeled off from 12,000 feet, diving almost vertically. Their scream felt like claws dragging across the sky. Bombs fell, one after another, whistling with deadly finality. One tore open the port's secondary battery. Another ripped through the crew quarters. A third detonated beside turret number 2, killing dozens instantly. Captain Ariga felt the vibration roll up through the bridge like the heartbeat of a dying beast. "Sir!" an officer cried. "Fires spreading below decks, flooding in compartments 12 through 18. Ariga didn't flinch. "Contain it." But some fires could not be contained. 10:35 hours. Yamato lists. A deep groan trembled through the ship. Steel warped. Bulkheads bent. Masami heard a new sound. Not explosions, not gunfire, but the sea rushing in. He turned in horror. A column of seawater blasted upward near the port midsection, spraying shattered metal and bodies across the deck. The torpedoes were working. Yamato began to list, slow at first, then more sharply. 5 degrees port list, someone shouted. "No, 7 degrees. Flooding worsening aft." Masami swallowed hard. The deck was no longer level beneath his boots. His gun mount had begun to tilt dangerously. Still he fired. Still the sky burned. 10:42 hours. The hell divers return. The third wave approached. These pilots had been watching Yamato's movements carefully, waiting for the list to worsen. A listing battleship was easier to hit, more predictable, more vulnerable. They dove in perfect formation, bomb doors opening in unison. Ariga watched them descend. Dozens of dark silhouettes falling like iron rain. His knuckles whitened around the railing. he whispered, almost too quietly to hear. Here comes the second death. Bombs slammed into Yamato's deck, one tearing open the mess hall, another detonating near the communications center, blowing signalmen off their feet. Men burned, men drowned, men screamed. Masami's gun jammed. He grabbed the feed tray, shaking it desperately. Come on, come on! Another explosion hurled him backward across the deck. He hit the rail hard. His vision blurred, his mouth filled with blood. Smoke swallowed everything. Through the haze, he saw figures running, crawling, dragging wounded men away from burning compartments. The ship was dying, and yet it continued to fight. 10:55 hours. The attack slow. American aircraft circled for another pass, but the waves began to thin. Pilots were low on ammunition, low on fuel, some limping back to their carriers with shredded wings. Captain Arriga watched the sky, chest rising and falling with labored breaths. Are they withdrawing? Kikuwa asked. Arriga shook his head. No, they are rearming. The worst was yet to come. Below him, Yamato listed 12 degrees. Fires raged. Water poured in. But the great battleship kept her bow pointed toward Okinawa, not in hope, but in defiance. April 7th, 1945. 12:14 hours. East China Sea. The sea had turned the color of spilled ink. Dark, swirling, laced with fire and drifting debris. Smoke poured from Yamato's port side in thick black columns that twisted into the pale afternoon sky. The list had grown sharper, more sinister, dragging the ship's massive weight toward the waves like an invisible hand. Inside the forward damage control center, Chief Petty Officer Osamu Nakajima staggered through ankle-deep water, the smell of fuel and scorched flesh burning his nostrils. Sparks rained from ruptured wiring overhead. Men worked frantically around him, hammering wedges into buckling bulkheads, pumping water, dragging hoses, shouting orders no one could fully hear over the roar of dying machinery. "Bulkhead 17 won't hold," a petty officer screamed. "We need reinforcements." Nakajima shook his head. "There are no reinforcements. Do what you can." The steel around them groaned. A deep metallic agony that felt alive, like the ship itself crying out. Above, on the weather deck, Seaman Masami Taira crawled across twisted metal, ears ringing from the last bomb blast. Smoke burned his eyes. Shrapnel tore at his uniform. The 25mm gun mount he had manned earlier was gone. Just gone. Ripped from the deck as if plucked by a giant hand. He rose shakily, coughing. Through gaps in the smoke, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Specks, dozens at first, then hundreds, returning. The Americans were back. A panicked voice rose from a surviving spotting station. "Enemy dive bombers, bearing 150, descending fast, multiple squadrons." Masami felt his heart collapse into his stomach. How many waves had hit them already? 4? 5? How many times had the ship endured what no battleship was ever designed to survive? But Yamato still moved, barely, still pushing forward despite her wounds. A voice crackled over the surviving speakers from the bridge. "Captain Arriga, men of Yamato, the enemy comes again. All hands, prepare for renewed attack." His voice was calm, solid, almost gentle. Masami swallowed hard and forced himself to stand, gripping a railing for balance as the deck pitched beneath him. Somewhere deep inside the burning hull, the massive boilers groaned, struggling to keep pressure as seawater flooded the compartments around them. Men fought with wrenches and welding torches, sweat pouring down their faces despite the cold air. The ship's inner arteries, the pipes, shafts, cables, were severed, spasming, broken. And now the sky fell again. 12:20 hours. The last onslaught begins. Hell divers plunged from 12,000 feet like angels of death, wings folded tight, bomb racks glinting. Torpedo planes swept in low across the silvered waves, lining up on Yamato's starboard side, the side already weakened by fire and internal flooding. Captain Arriga stepped onto the open bridge wing, wind slamming against his coat, smoke stinging his eyes. Beside him, Exo Kikawa braced against the railing, jaw clenched. "They target starboard," Kikawa said. "They mean to roll us." Arriga nodded slowly. They know what they're doing. They had learned from earlier strikes. Learn, adjust, strike again. The American pilots were not simply attacking. They were dismantling the ship, strategically, piece by piece. Ariga whispered something only the wind could hear. So this is how giants die. 12:23 hours. Hell breaks loose. The first torpedo struck under turret number 1. The explosion sending a geyser of water and steel higher than the mast. The shock wave blasted through the forward compartments. Men disappeared in an instant. No screams, no time. Another hit farther aft, tearing open a section already weakened from the morning attack. The list worsened, 14 degrees, then 16. Inside the main engine room, boilers hissed and screamed as seawater surged toward them. Nakajima shouted, "Shut valves! Shut all valves!" Men ran, slipping in the rising water, trying to cut off flooding that no human effort could stop. Another torpedo struck. Lights went out. Steam filled the corridors. Yamato shuddered. Above, bombs rained down, 500-pounders, piercing her decks, detonating in fireballs that ripped through fuel stores, ammunition lockers, and living spaces. Masami dropped flat as one exploded 60 feet away, the concussion lifting him off the deck and slamming him back down. He tasted blood. His ears rang so violently he couldn't even hear his own breathing. He forced himself to look up. Helldivers soared past, trailing smoke from AA hits or simply pulling up after releasing their payloads. Avengers skimmed the waterline, their torpedoes streaking toward Yamato in deadly white trails. The entire world was noise, screaming engines, thunderous detonations, the furious rattle of anti-aircraft guns firing their last ammunition. And then, a sound deeper than any bomb, a sound that shook the horizon, a sound like a mountain breaking. 12:34 hours. Yamato's soul ruptures. Turret number 3. Massive, towering, the pride of the ship. Erupted in a cataclysmic explosion, a pillar of fire ripping into the sky. The ammunition magazine beneath it had been breached. The blast ripped the turret from its bearings, hurling steel plates the size of trucks into the sea. Flames engulfed the aft deck. Hundreds of men vanished in the inferno. Masami stared in horror. The sound hit him an instant later, a gut-shaking boom that stole the air from his lungs and knocked him to his knees. On the bridge, Ariga felt the shockwave hammer upward through the superstructure, rattling glass, shaking bones. Kikawa looked at him, eyes wide, voice breaking. "Sir, the aft magazine, it's gone." Ariga didn't answer. He watched flames consume the stern, watched the smoke rise like a funeral pyre. The ship was dying, and there was nothing left to be done. 12:41 hours, final moments. The firestorm raced through the hull, overwhelming damage control teams. Flooding accelerated. Compartments buckled. Men drowned or burned or simply vanished in the choking smoke. Yamato listed 20 degrees, then 24. Masami clung to a railing as the world tilted violently. Sailors slid across the deck, screaming, falling into the sea as waves crashed over the listing hull. "Abandon ship!" someone shouted. But no order came from Captain Ariga. He remained on the bridge, refusing to leave the ship entrusted to him. Nakajima, waist-deep in freezing seawater, ordered his men to retreat through the collapsing bulkhead. "Go! Go now, she's rolling!" He looked back one last time at the engine room, the heart of the giant, before the lights flickered and died forever. On deck, Masami felt the list reach a terrifying angle. He could no longer stand. He could barely breathe. The ship groaned, an immense final exhale. Then, Yamato rolled, her massive hull tilted to port, slow at first, then accelerating. Water poured across the deck in roaring waves, sweeping men, equipment, wreckage into the sea. Masami jumped. Cold darkness swallowed him. He kicked toward the surface, lungs burning. Behind him, he felt something through the water. A growing pressure, a rumble, a rising force, unstoppable. Yamato, Japan's greatest warship, the largest battleship ever built, was seconds from her end. April 7th, 1945, 12:45 hours, East China Sea. The world was nothing but bubbles and darkness. Masami kicked desperately, arms burning, chest screaming for air. The cold stabbed him like knives, slicing through his uniform, through his skin, all the way to bone. He felt rather than heard the deep metallic howl behind him, the death scream of 70,000 tons of steel descending into its grave. He broke the surface in a violent gasp. The sky spun. Smoke curled across the water. Pieces of the ship, massive plates of steel, burning timber, entire gun mounts, rained down around him. "Swim!" someone shouted. "Get away from the ship!" Masami paddled blindly, coughing, salt water filling his mouth as waves crashed over his head. He looked back, once, and wished he hadn't. Yamato was nearly on her beam ends. Her blackened hull rose like a mountain above the sea, her keel exposed, dripping. Men clung to ropes, to railings, to anything, only to be thrown loose as the listing worsened. From deep inside the ship, a thunderous rumble rose, low, menacing, building. Masami felt the water vibrating against his ribs. That was when he understood. The magazines, they were going to blow. He kicked harder. Floating debris scraped his legs. Oil coated the surface in rainbow streaks, stinging his eyes. Voices cried out behind him, hundreds of them. Some calling for help, some calling for their mothers, some praying. And then everything went white. 12:47 hours. Yamato explodes. The battleship vanished in a single, colossal detonation. A fireball erupted from her center, a pillar of flame driving skyward with impossible force. Thousands of tons of ammunition igniting at once. The blast punched a hole in the clouds, a towering mushroom of smoke and fire bursting upward more than 4 miles into the air. Masami felt the shockwave before he saw the light. The sea rose beneath him like a living thing. He was hurled sideways, flipped, spun, slammed into the water with such violence the world blurred into blackness. When he surfaced, breathless, the sky had changed color. The plume towered above him, a vast black thunderhead rolling upward, lit from within by flashes of burning fuel and detonating shells. Steel rained down like meteors. He curled into a ball, covering his head with trembling arms. Chunks of armor plate the size of trucks hissed as they plunged into the sea. Burning wood drifted like embers from a giant bonfire. Bodies bobbed among the debris, hundreds of them, some lifeless, some struggling weakly, many screaming. Masami swallowed hard, nausea rising. This wasn't a battle, it was annihilation. Farther from the blast, Lieutenant Commander Hideo Miyamoto surfaced, ripping off his smoldering life jacket. His ears rang so violently he could barely hear his own coughing. The world smelled of burning oil and cordite. He turned in a slow circle. Where Yamato had been was now nothing. No hull, no mast, no superstructure, only wreckage, small pieces. Too small. He whispered into the choking haze. Yamato is gone. 12:55 hours. After the blast, the sea burned. Patches of flame dotted the surface, floating pools of oil ignited by the explosion. Survivors kicked weakly between them, trying to avoid the spreading fire. Some were too injured to move. Others drifted silently, faces pale, eyes open. Masami wiped oil from his mouth, coughing. His flight trousers were torn. His left arm hung numb from the explosion. A voice called across the water. "Over here! Swim this way!" He turned toward the sound. A small cluster of survivors clung to a partially submerged raft, no more than a floating ammunition crate. The man calling waved frantically. Masami forced his arms to move. Every stroke felt like dragging the weight of the entire ship with him. A wave pushed him closer. Hands grabbed him, pulled him against the raft. He collapsed over the wooden slats, gasping, shaking uncontrollably. "Hold on," the man said. "Just hold on." Masami looked at him, Petty Officer Nakajima. His hair was burned. His clothing was half shredded. Blood trickled from a cut across his scalp. "Chief," Masami rasped. "You made it." Nakajima nodded weakly. "Some of us did." He looked around. Not many. Silence hung between them. Behind them, the massive black plume continued rising, a monument of smoke marking the grave of the largest battleship ever built. 13:10 hours. The sky remains hostile. American aircraft circled overhead. Not attacking now, only observing. Some pilots dipped their wings, signaling to one another. A few stared in quiet shock at the sheer enormity of the explosion. One pilot muttered into his microphone, "My God, what a waste of men." Another replied, "That wasn't just a ship, that was an empire dying." 1325 hours. Japanese escorts approach. Far on the horizon, destroyers Yukikaze and Hamikaze cut through the waves at flank speed, dodging drifting debris. Signalmen scanned the water. "Survivors off starboard bow." Yukikaze's captain gave the order. "Pull them aboard, every living soul." Sailors threw lines. Men in the water reached up with blistered hands. Masami felt strong arms haul him onto the deck. His knees buckled. Someone propped him against the railing, wrapping him in a soot-stained blanket. Nakajima collapsed beside him, coughing violently. Masami turned toward the horizon. The smoke plume still rose, reaching into the heavens. He whispered, "She was invincible." Nakajima shook his head slowly. "No ship is invincible." His voice cracked. "Not anymore." They sat quietly as more survivors were dragged aboard, burned, trembling, dazed. Sailors wept openly as they realized how few men remained. Yamato had carried more than 3,000 souls. Barely 300 survived. 1340 hours. The Empire's shadow fades. Captain Ariga never surfaced. Neither did most of Yamato's officers. Neither did the hundreds of boys stationed deep within her armored core. Their ship had been their tomb. Masami stared across the water, vision still blurry, mind half numb. The enormity of the loss pressed down on him like the weight of the sea itself. "What will happen now?" he asked softly. Nakajima did not answer for a long time. Finally, "The war continues. But after today," he exhaled, voice hollow, "Japan will never build another battleship. Not ever." A gust of wind carried the drifting smoke plume farther south, toward Okinawa. Toward the battle Yamato had never reached. Masami whispered, "So this is how the age of battleships ends." Nakajima nodded slowly, "With a single afternoon and a sky full of planes."